This is Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast hosted by Cody Schultz and Ben Horn. An issue I ran into quite a bit when I'm using digital cameras that no longer occurs nearly as often with film is overshooting. Clicking away at the shutter because, hey, digital files are practically free, so why not? And while neither of us can fault people from doing such things, there's certainly merit in learning to slow down and take into deeper consideration what you want from a photograph, from a composition. Perhaps one of the downsides to working with film and not producing so much work each year is the difficulty in making collections of photographs, whether to display on your website or perhaps in an ebook. Collections such as these can be fantastic ways to organize and display your work, though it brings difficulties such as how well the images pair with one another between color, tonality, and subject matter. All of this leads us to discussing success, a common theme, it seems, from these past few weeks, and how the pressure to be successful has changed from when Ben was young compared to what I now face in my mid-20s. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Have you ever watched any of those masterclass videos?
I haven't. I've seen the all the ads for them everywhere, but I've never watched one myself.
I've watched a couple in the past. Honestly, don't remember which ones or really anything about them, but they have this deal going on that you can get 6 10-minute videos or whatever from 6 different masterclasses, all on photography.
Mm-hmm.
And for free. You just have to sign up with your for an account. And so I was watching one of them, Paul Nicklin.
He spoke at the Outsiders conference a little while back.
Okay, yeah, he's big name wildlife photographer. But I just found it fascinating watching this video. I couldn't get through all of it because like every 2 minutes, not even, was just filled with the clicks of the camera, like hundreds of frames.
Oh, wow.
Because he's so in this one, he's no, computer, please don't restart. Not a good notification to get right now.
This is why we shoot analog cameras, by the way. You don't get that very much.
Yeah, he photographs with Sony. He's a Sony ambassador. And he had these, this A7, I think, with a long lens, and then like 2 other bodies that he was using. And he was photographing this black bear. The one, he was on the boat. Black bear was on like this rocky beach. And it was just tumbling over these rocks, trying to look for food and such. And, ended up just photographing like nonstop. So he'd talk for a little bit, real quiet and everything, and then all you'd hear is like just rapid fire of pressing the shutter. And it just brought me back to like when I was photographing digitally and like how often I would just rapid fire at a scene, even a landscape. Like, oh, I'm just gonna take 3 or 4 photographs just of this scene within a 3-minute time span because it's a waterfall, it's moving, I don't know exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting to see like the progress that I made between looking at a scene and not exactly knowing what I want versus now where I'm like, oh, I can look at a scene, I can visualize it better.
It seems like that's kind of the evolution of an artist. Because when you're talking, I was thinking about how, I had the same sort of thing when I was first getting into it, because there's that time frame when you don't necessarily trust yourself in terms of knowing exactly what it is that you want, when the best moment is, what the best stuff is. So you definitely overcompensate, which is something that is completely necessary for, wildlife photography, when you have things that are moving and you try and get just that right moment. But with a landscape, it's a different sort of thing. But people still do have a tendency to just really completely overshoot. And I think it's because they don't necessarily trust their instinct in the moment. I wonder if that's perhaps what it is.
That's how I see it, at least from my own evolution. But I think another thing that plays into it is you have SD cards that are 64 gigabytes, 128 gigabytes, whatever. Mm-hmm. So you have all this free data. Like, why not use it? And I think that's a mentality that a lot of people get into of, oh, well, if I can photograph 60 frames of this one scene, and then I come back home and I just pick the one that is as close to exact as what I want without having to really compromise or blend them all together to make what I want. I think that's another big viewpoint for a lot of people.
And it's strange how, I mean, when I was working with digital, I definitely would overshoot, just and for the reasons that you describe, in terms of maybe if there's something not quite right with one frame, then you have another one as a backup, or you can blend them together, or you can make them work in that sense. But it's strange how it becomes perfectly normal to approach a scene, get one viewpoint of it, expose a single sheet of film, and also to walk away from that scene with a greater sense of confidence in what I captured.
Yeah.
In a way that I'd walk away from scenes in the past when I was shooting digital and thinking, I shot a lot of photos. I don't know if I have it. I don't necessarily feel confident in what I captured. But with the way that I work now, I'll expose a single sheet of film and then I'll walk away from it, oftentimes feeling so content that I don't really want to shoot any more photos for the rest of the day. Where I'm like, cool, I got my shot, I'm good. Now I can just go out and explore. It's kind of like I'm off the clock, kind of like clocking out of work, where it's like, cool, that's done. And then I think it allows me to see things a little bit differently from that point on with the pressure off. And I never really had that experience when I was working with digital. So it's kind of strange how not only do I shoot less, but after that one photo, I walk away from it with far more confidence than I did when I knew what I had captured by looking at the back of the camera.
Yeah, and I mean that just comes with time too. I mean,
yes,
even if you're shooting digitally, like when you first pick up a camera, you're not gonna be able to have that same vision, that same confidence as you will later down the line when you actually start to realize, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want. This is what I want to say with my photographs, or how I want them to look at the end. Because I end up feeling the same way with a lot of mine, where I just walk up to a scene and I know almost exactly what I want when I see it. I may walk around it a little bit, but once I pull out the camera, it's staked where I want it to be.
Yeah.
And the only times that I'm actually photographing or exposing another sheet of film is if something happens, like this past weekend, like we talked about the last episode, where I had something happen with focus, or I knew something was wrong with that image right after exposing it. Because otherwise, if something happens where I come back, I develop a sheet and it's like, oh, there's a light leak or too much wind in the frame or something like that, then unless I know it in the field, I'm not going to expose the second sheet, or unless it's a photograph that I really feel I need to capture.
See, it took me a while to get over the feeling that I had when I was first starting out by working with a large format, that immediately after shooting a photo, I would doubt my judgment for exposure. I'd doubt my judgment for composition and all these sort of things, which would oftentimes lead me to expose another sheet of film, even though I'm doing the exact same thing again. I'm not changing anything, but I guess it just gave me that sense of not satisfaction, but that sense of, I scratched that itch. It's confirmed my suspicions and everything. But I have gotten to the point now where I oftentimes do feel confident enough after a single exposure that I can walk away from that scene and be happy with it. I will pull out my meter again and meter the scene one more time just to give myself that peace of mind. But I think it kind of, as you were saying earlier, it's based on the experience of having worked with it long enough. And, all those past decisions on those past photographs that turned out fine, and knowing that I'm using that same decision-making process now as I was then, I think that's also something that helps to build more confidence in the work. And I was just thinking, how long has it been since you started working with the 4x5? How many years has it been now?
Come, I think April or June of this year, it'll be 4 years.
Okay. And have you gotten over the point where you question yourself on or did you ever question yourself on technical things after you exposed that sheet of film?
Here and there. So like for the last weekend that I was out, I was trying different things with it. So at that point, I was questioning some of the movements that I was making, some of the decisions I was making, because I wasn't familiar with them.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, I don't really question anything.
That's
because good. I've also come to a point where I don't really care. I mean, it's one of those things that I go out for the enjoyment of being out in nature, for the enjoyment of just photographing, because I feel it brings me closer to nature in a way. And the end product doesn't really matter to me. Like,
that's fascinating. I mean, I can relate to that a little bit, but not quite to that same degree.
I mean, you look at my website, I haven't released any work at all last year. I don't think there's a single photograph that I put on my website from 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, of course, I showed a few of those photographs from the Tennessee trip, from the Smokies trip, but they're not part of my portfolio right now. I didn't officially put them on my website. Even the photographs that I have, like I have a couple sheets to the side of me on my scanner that I have to scan in, and I've had those sitting there for all of this week, and I just haven't gotten on it. Because the end result, the end photographs just don't mean to me what any of the other experience does. I mean, it's kind of like going to a concert and taking a video of the concert and then looking back at it. It's not going to be as meaningful as had you put your phone in your pocket and just experienced it.
That's interesting. I don't think that I have quite the same sort of experience in the field as that. But also perhaps it's because for much of the photography I do now, it is really a means by which I'm able to survive.
Right.
So perhaps it's a bit of a different relationship with it.
Yeah, I mean, if I was making a living off my photography, strictly speaking off of like print sales or the production of actual photographs in the same manner that you are,
mm-hmm.
then yeah, I don't think I would have quite the same relationship as I do right now with the photographs. I think I would almost be coerced to care more about the end result, to develop my film more often and put out new work at a more frequent rate than what I do now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I question whether there's truth in that too. Whether I would actually still want to get to that level of pushing out work. Because, I mean, you look at guys like TJ Thorne, you look at Eric Bennett, Alex Noriega.
Mm-hmm.
They're not putting out a ton of work.
Usually in collections, it seems, is kind
right.
of a really, a really fascinating way that photographers like that will release work maybe sit on images for a while and kind of pair them together, and which is something that I think it's something where people really look forward to that release of work, but it's also something that they're able to control a little bit. I mean, some of that work could be from years ago. So it really is an interesting approach.
It was an approach that I have only really recently come to better understand as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was photographing digitally, and even when I first started with film, I would be releasing work much more frequently. Essentially, as soon as it was done, I was done editing it, I'd throw it up on my website or onto Instagram or wherever. And I think that plays a key role too, because I don't have social media, so I don't have any kind of immediacy with sharing new work. If I was on Instagram and being like some of those people who even posting one photograph a week, say, that's still 52 weeks in a year. So say 48 weeks, take a couple weeks off, but 48 weeks of posting, 48 photographs. I don't photograph 48 times, 48 compositions in a year, especially none that I am proud enough to share. So I think that plays a big role in it too, where the people who are much more active on social media kind of need to have that kind of immediacy, whereas I don't have that anymore. So, okay, like my writing is updated semi-frequently enough on my website or whatever to kind of take the place of the photographs that aren't.
Yeah. And it's almost like the desire or the need fueled by social media to post work. It's kind of like you're beta testing your photos on the masses, without really taking a full chance to get to know those images. And that's something where, with the way that I do things, it's always at least a 1 month delay between when I capture the photo and scan it versus when it gets posted, and sometimes longer than that. So I kind of have this built-in time where I can just sit with that photo for a while, look at it on my computer, figure out what bugs me about it, figure out what I like about it. And by the time I share it, it's usually fairly well refined. So in a way, I can see that a little bit like releasing the collections of work, but to release them all at the same time when you see all the photos next to each other, I do find that to be a very, very fascinating approach of doing things.
So that brings me to a thought that I have. So with your work, especially with your trips, have you ever given thought to releasing, say, even just a small free downloadable ebook that centers on a little bit of writing about your trips, as well as all the photographs that you had taken on specific trips? Because you kind of run on, say, a quarterly basis for your trips.
Yeah.
So I could very easily see, even if it comes out after your videos or before your videos or something, where you have a ebook collection that comes out free to download, and you have a little story about each photograph. And then maybe if it comes out after the videos, you have a link or even a video player embedded in ebooks or however, where then they can see that photograph being made by you in the field.
A bit of a variation of that. So, and I'm still, this coming week is when I'll be able to start working on it, because as of the time that we're recording this, the final video will have already, by the time this one goes live, the final video will have been posted like a couple weeks or so ago. And so basically I'm just at the point now where I'm posting the last of the videos for the trip. And so now I need to start putting together the other side project I was working on, which is creating the ebook with the journal entries, the written journal entries I took while I was in the field.
Right.
And then pairing that with the pictures of the film, in a more unedited state. So it's a little bit of a variation. It's maybe not so much like a portfolio, kind of like what I've seen other photographers release, where it's, and I think it was Sarah and Ron that did this, where the pictures from a trip in a collection. I actually haven't downloaded theirs to see exactly how they went about it, but basically, instead of talking about things after the fact, this will be the actual handwritten journal entries in the field. And I don't think I'm going to supplement it with any current text, really.
Okay.
And I think I'm going to keep it relatively raw in terms of the mostly unedited photos. Maybe I'll put the edited ones in there as well. I haven't quite figured it out. But this was really meant more as a trial run, to see how well something like that would work. But I think it's something that'd be easy enough for me to do for every trip. I hadn't thought about doing that for every trip. But I think that would be a fascinating approach to it all. But I haven't really considered doing like the final photos with like reflections on the work after the fact. I haven't really thought about doing that yet.
I just think it would be an interesting way to organize, if people would want to see it that way, to organize each of your trips. Like the photographs, just see what all came from each trip very specifically. Even if that would be just a simple gallery on your website instead of, say, Fall Zion 2022 photographs. And then you have the 3 or 4 or whatever they are for that.
Yeah.
It's just all of this is kind of running in my head, trying to figure out things as I rework my website, as I figure out different ebook ideas that I personally plan on doing come this year. But yeah, that'd be the idea of collections, especially, is something that has always fascinated me, but I just don't photograph enough to do that.
Yeah, it does take a lot of work to get to that.
And you see guys that are, I mean, you look at Sarah and Ron with their ebooks, like 40, 50 photographs in an ebook from one place just from last year alone.
That's several years of work for me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I have to count through how many photographs I actually took this, or how many sheets of film I exposed in 2022, but I would be surprised if it was like more than 50, and a good number of those won't see the light of day.
So in our last episode, I had mentioned the Jobo film processor that I had received as a very kind gift from Holger in Australia. And the following day after we recorded, I received the power transformer because it runs on European voltage.
Right.
And so yesterday was my first opportunity to see if it works. And it does.
Nice.
It does.
Nice.
So everything works on it. There's several moving parts. There's a motor that spins this drum that has a film in it. That works great. There's a heating element that gets the water up to the specified temperature. That works great. And then there's a pump that circulates water through the unit, and that works great.
Did you double check the temperature on that?
I haven't done that yet. Okay. I do have a thermometer from when I was doing some of my my past attempts at home developing. So I do have a really good thermometer. I was thinking about putting in there just to make sure.
Yeah. I mean, at least with black and white, it doesn't matter as much. But if you start to get into like C41 or especially E6, then that's vital.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll definitely have to make sure I do that. And then, so right after powering up, making sure everything works, I went ahead and ordered the drum that will fit the 8x10. And so I'm pretty excited about this. I think that And the other thing too is in the background is I'm getting ready for my trip out to Death Valley, as well as a Zion trip, kind of depending on the weather as far as where I go first. But I think I will perhaps try to take black and white a little bit more seriously on this trip, now that I know I'll need to have some film to run through the processor, and once I get pretty confident in my ability to do that, I should be able to hopefully produce consistently developed film, which was a problem I had before, where you'd have some like developing inconsistencies around the edges and stuff like that, which would ruin the photo. But now knowing that I have the ability to have well-developed black and white film and have full control over it, I do think I'm going to start taking that a little bit more seriously on the trips, and to dip my toes into that water a little bit more. So I'm kind of excited about that, and all the possibilities that will exist in this coming year.
Especially Death Valley. I think that would be a really great place to start off with some strong black and white.
Yeah, because
you can photograph all day long.
Oh yeah. Midday light becomes a very, very good light source to use.
Just focus on texture, focus on the light itself. Dark, play with blacks and what will be whites.
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of really strong work. I mean, especially from like Sarah Marino, and from Death Valley specifically. It's
it's going to be a matter of retraining myself to recognize the potential in subjects that I simply overlooked before, because I had a more kind of a narrow view on what it was that I learned I was able to photograph. So I think it will be kind of like that first learning curve when you first get into photography and everything is new, everything is exciting, and you don't quite know the limits on things yet. So you're just kind of testing the limits and pushing the boundaries a little bit. And so I'm looking forward to that, and seeing what develops as that was a bad joke as a result of doing that, and also with the fact that I'm going to have a lot less weight on my back now with just the Chamonix, the lightweight kit, where I can go around and carry the camera in times that in the past it would have stayed behind in my truck. So I think that'll be kind of fun.
I think I've asked you before, but do you have any color filters?
I do. I have a red. I think I have red, yellow, and green.
Okay.
And so in back in August, when I exposed a few sheets of black and white up in the White Mountains I haven't developed yet, I did use some color filters on that. Now the problem is that was so long ago that I exposed a film that I have honestly no clue which ones. I think there are some where I shot with and without a red filter.
Okay.
Because I know that the effect will be very strong up there, especially at elevation. So I'll have to kind of try to remember what I did. Perhaps I'll have to take a little better notes in the field as I start going down this path. But also I should mention that. So you had sent me a link, sort of like a test view of the new version of your website you're looking at.
Right.
And just seeing how all of your black and white images play very nicely with each other in the format that you have it, where they're all almost like puzzle pieces, just kind of like all arranged in the various rows and stuff. And the fact that all of your work pairs very nicely with each other, that is also something that has me excited about black and white, because with color you'll have two images, they fight each other. They don't like to be next to each other. So I think my work wouldn't display as well like that, but for black and whites it does. So so especially in the context of what we were talking about earlier in terms of creating bodies of work, I think that also goes hand in hand with black and white, because you can have two images that are quite different, but they still play nice with each other.
Right. It's funny. I was listening to one of the episodes of F-Stop Collaborate and Listen with, it was Nick Becker who was being interviewed. Mm-hmm. And he had created this sort of algorithm. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but essentially it takes an average of the colors of each of your photographs,
Mm-hmm.
and it allows you to create collections that kind of go by color more so.
Oh, interesting.
And so I think he uses that for a lot of his galleries. But the entire time that I'm listening to this, I'm like, that wouldn't really work for me, would it?
No, it puts all the pictures that have dominant black and white together, which is all of them. But also, I think it's nice because you don't have that problem when displaying your work, and you can concentrate more on pairing images perhaps based on the emotional connection to certain images and how they relate to each other in terms of the elements and the subject matter, as opposed to just the color. Because I mean, I'll have sometimes two photos where the subject matter is similar, but the color is just far enough off where it's like oil and water. Those images do not play well together.
Yeah.
So that also I think speaks in terms of trying without the distraction of color. You can have it where you can perhaps experiment more with the way the images pair with each other, and then the meaning that comes from those photos in a way that doesn't really work with color.
Yeah, one thing that I try and pay attention to when I'm organizing my gallery and stuff like that is more so the luminosity, more so like the keeping the bright images closer to each other than the darker images, and kind of having that kind of separation. Because I know with my one photograph, Detritus, it's the one that you have a print of, the
Yes.
The pine needles on the snow, essentially.
Yeah.
And that aside of one of my photographs, like even Mementi Mori that we had talked about last week, or really a lot of them actually. But regardless, the darker images, it could be very jarring, just in the same way that's even
true.
if they're very similar to subject matters, they could be, depending on the brightness of them, it could be like really weird to look at. So that's really the only thing that I have to keep an eye on, but it's not near as bad as if you had a light color image versus a darker color image, and then on top of that, yeah, the subject matter might match up, but the colors don't. So now you have two different things that are very different from each other that make it jarring. So
back when I did the book with Kozu back in 2020, there were certain pairings of photos that they really liked to have together because they did have a similar theme. But they were just not quite there. Like there's something where there was, the image on its own was fine, but when paired side by side with a similar image, it now looked as though one of them had a color cast and the other one didn't, even though on their own they were fine, but somehow when paired together. And so in the production of that book, I went through and I tweaked some of the images so that they played really nicely with one another. And in some cases, I think I just left the images that way, and that's how they're displayed on my website now. I don't know if you've ever done anything where if you were pairing two of your black and white images together, have you ever done anything where you had to perhaps edit one of them a little bit so that it pairs better with the other one with tonality or contrast or brightness or anything like that? Or is that nothing that you've ever
I've never really played with pairing two images together.
Yeah.
So I've never really even had to worry about that, of like how they look side by side. Perhaps if I was doing like a book, I would consider it more heavily. But
yeah, because when you have the images on facing pages, it definitely it allows you to see, I think, the similarities and the differences between them. And maybe that's the thing that some photographers will notice that other people just like they don't notice that. But that's something that I definitely have become aware of.
Yeah, it's not something that I've really messed around with much. Like I said, if I plan on doing a book at some point, then yeah, I'll probably go through, lay it out how I want to lay it out, or whatever the case may be, and then go back and make sure that I fix any kind of images that might need some tweaking to to pair more nicely with each other.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of my images already do that pretty decently, at least.
Yeah, they work well as a collection.
It's not like I have a ton of real high key images and then a bunch of low key images where there's a huge contrast separation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely helpful too, especially when you look at the work that I've taken up at my family's cabin, because I plan on doing probably what will become just a free ebook monograph of the photographs I have so far there, and then eventually turn into a true physical book. But I've been playing around with that, and most of them are right around in the same tonality.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Speaking of that too, so I was listening to another interview, again with Tim Ferriss this time.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim was interviewing the author Stephen Pressfield. Are you familiar with him? Or
No, I am not.
So he wrote the book The War of Art, and a couple other ones. He pretty much coined this this idea of resistance, and it's the quote-unquote monster that makes you procrastinate, that makes you self-sabotage when you get close to finishing something. While he was being interviewed, he brought up the fact that he didn't publish his first book until he was right around 50 years old. And it got me thinking on this whole idea of success and small successes versus specifically late success,
Mm-hmm.
and what we consider to be late for success. I mean, there are images out there that go through all of the different people like Oprah or Walt Disney and hyper successful people, and they list down the ages that they were when they actually like hit it off with fame. And it's always fun looking at those versus like the Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg examples where they were really young, like my age, when they started to really take off.
Mm-hmm.
Because you look at the people that are like 50, even their 40s, when they actually start becoming more successful, and you're like, oh, I have time. And it's kind of like that relief of pressure that we put on ourselves, especially in this kind of culture that we're in, where hustling and late success, and you should be working your ass off during your 20s, and so that you can relax when you're in your 60s and all of that. Like, it was just eye-opening to see that. Like, Stephen Pressfield is now quite a successful author, and it took him until he was 50 to actually find his pace and to find his any form of success that he has.
Which kind of feels like that's going to become a little bit more the norm in some ways. Because it seems like the traditional milestones that people had in the past have all been pushed further down the line, whether it's, career goals, marriage, kids, whatever it is. It seems like everything keeps getting pushed further and further down the line, because it's not the same world that we lived in, many years ago. And there are those that will sort of catch fire early on and, rocket to new heights. But also, it seems like sometimes that also leads to, people plummeting back down pretty equally hard sometimes, where it's that sustained slow growth that seems like it leads to better things. Also, now that people are just like living longer, and people, are close to retirement age, and they're like, cool, now what do I want to take on now versus, way back when people simply didn't live as long. And I guess the question I have for you is, what kind of pressure do you feel to be successful at your age? Because I'm curious how that compares to how I was when I was in your shoes.
A lot of the pressure that comes from it is from like YouTube videos specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's always touting the successes that they have, the millions of followers that they have, kind of like flexing on each other.
Yeah.
One video that I was watching is, I think he just turned 25, so he's right like the same age as I am. And he's over in Paris and he just bought like $1 million house in Paris. I'm like, dude, you're 25. Like,
Yeah.
I'm still living with my parents. I barely have a savings account. Like, how? And then you look, there's another one. I don't know exactly how old he is, maybe like his early 30s. And another YouTuber. And he was a doctor. He had just become a doctor right around 2019, 2020 or so, while doing this whole YouTube thing. A lot of talk on finance and all of that kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And he did a review of a financial review of all of his different income streams and everything for this past year. And he has a bunch of people working under him, so his expenses are pretty high, but he brought in like 3.5 million pounds. So like $3.5 million
Mm-hmm.
from like Skillshare, from YouTube revenue, from all of this. So you see all of this kind of stuff of younger people right around my age or so, that are hyper successful. And then you look at what I'm doing where, okay, I have a podcast with 600 audience members or 600 weekly listeners.
Yeah.
And I have a newsletter with like 100 subscribers and like I'm still in college kind of deal.
Yeah.
Like very, very typical stuff for someone my age to be doing, like in general, at least. But still, like you have that pressure of, well, am I really doing enough, or should I be doing more because I'm not living in Paris in $1 million condo,
Yeah.
or running a business that's making $3.5 million a year and growing. Like, so I think that's where a lot of my pressure comes from, and it's all self-imposed.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at, like I was saying about like Walt Disney and Oprah, you look at like Steve Jobs, the fact that he was fired from Apple, the company that he had co-founded when he was in his 30s, and then came back to work for Apple and made it into what we know it as today. So just the fact that there's so much more time to worry about or to build up those successes, and to focus more on small successes.
Yeah.
So like in this interview with Stephen Pressfield, he had mentioned that he focuses more on the small successes. So he wakes up and he goes to the gym, and he'll do some stuff around the house, and he'll write for a half hour. And even if that just means that he only wrote maybe 2,000 words toward his book, or less than even 500 words toward his next book, it's still a success for that day.
Yeah.
So I think that's a perception that a lot of people are going to have to get into and get that mindset going, because to look at all of the influencers who have millions of dollars and millions of followers and all of this other, it's just not realistic for like any of us.
Yeah. When I was in my 20s, that sort of culture did not exist the same way that it is now. And when you would see people that would become successful very quickly, it was perhaps because they were an athlete at their very prime. Could be that they were like a musician, things along those lines, where it was tied to a very specific skill, where you look at that and you're like, I could never do that. Like, I know that, like, as if I were to be the best that I can be, I will never be as good as that athlete or that musician. But now when you have this, quote, success that is tied to simply just something relatively mundane, I can see how that would be. I mean, I've never liked the whole, the flaunting of wealth, the flaunting of success that seems to be so much more common now. And like on YouTube, when people post a video saying, I made $100,000 a year, taking landscape photos or whatever it is. Like, to me, that's just like, I don't want to look at that. I don't want to see that, because I don't even want that to enter my mind. But I think we live in a culture now where that has become more the norm. And it seems like it only serves a very negative purpose for the, 99% of other people out there that are not privileged in that same way, where they're able to, be struck by lightning in the same way that some other people have. And then because for them, it's simple. It's like, oh, I just did this, I did this, I did this. And then, here I am making, millions of dollars a year. But it's not that simple. It's not the sort of thing where everyone can do that. And also, what they show publicly isn't necessarily the reality of how they live. It's what they portray. Because there's a lot of people out there that make a lot of money, but they are in enormous amounts of debt in order.
Yeah, they're still living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They have an incredible amount of stress. And so, like, since I am fairly stubborn in my own right, like I have zero desire to pursue whatever it is that I think there's some people that are looking for that secret, in terms of like how to achieve that. But to me, that's just something where it's being incredibly disingenuous to one's self in order to obtain something for perhaps a hollow victory. Like, I've crafted my entire life around incredibly low stress. And so in terms of, carrying no debt, anything else, and, only buying something if I can actually afford it, and not, flaunting wealth. I mean, it's easy to do when you don't have wealth, but like, but like this hustle culture that we've spoken about in the past, it just seems to permeate so much of the greater culture these days, and people think that is something that they can achieve as well by following those same steps. But that person who got to that point in time, they followed those. Whatever worked for them isn't going to work for everyone. And also, perhaps there was a very narrow window in time when a person can set out to end up where that person ended up, and that gate is long since closed. So I find it to be an incredibly negative force. And in the same way that I'm very glad that when I went through, high school, middle school, college, all that sort of stuff, when social media did not exist back then, I'm very glad that I went through all of that without social media, without YouTube, without all these pressures of people becoming rich and famous for having no real discernible talents or skills in terms of, like, compared to musicians or athletes, where I can look at that and be like, yeah, of course I can't do that. Have you seen me? So yeah, I mean, just all the pressures that come with that. I'm just glad that I didn't come up in that world, because who knows? I mean, it's a very strong force to resist.
And I'm lucky in the sense that I know I don't want to do the kind of stuff that's going to lead to $3.5 million a year.
Yeah.
In general revenue, because I don't feel like doing YouTube videos. I don't want to do courses on Skillshare that are going to bring me money.
Yeah. You just want to do what you want to do.
Right. I'm not going to have the 3.5 million followers or subscribers on social media platforms that are going to let me be really successful with any sort of affiliate marketing. But as you were saying too about it's still tough, because you look at some of these guys, like the guy that I was telling you about in Paris,
mm-hmm.
who has that $1 million house. His videos are like, I did this for 30 days and here's what I found. And I did this, like the very simplistic self-help kind of things.
Yeah.
Like when you go to a bookstore or on Amazon and you see like 3 million self-help books, and they're all saying like very basic stuff. that in video form. I'm like, how are you making that much money just off of this? But it is.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes to be really tough. Like you had said, I can look at a football player and be like, I'm never going to be NFL quality football player.
It's easy to justify when you realize that that's on a whole different level, in terms of talent and skill and such.
Yeah. But I could just as easily tomorrow create a YouTube channel and do 30 days of, I don't know, using a pencil.
Here's what I learned. There's an eraser on the other end. Wow,
Yeah, exactly. Day 5, I realized there's an eraser.
Yeah.
I can erase things. That's just where it gets tough. So I'm glad to be away from social media more and more as the years go on, as I've continue along with this little process of pushing it away. But it's tough. It's tough to figure out your path when you see what you want to do as a passion, but then you see all these other people who are doing it and somehow making a ton of money off of it, and you're like, why can't I be there?
Yeah. And I will say, though, that there is another kind of a different thought process involved. So like when my wife and I were on our trip to Maui, as we were walking around the area where we were staying in the condo, and albeit the condo we were staying at was right on the beach, it was $188 a night. So we're clearly just rolling in tons of money, so it's a very inexpensive place, probably the least expensive of all the areas where we could be, where we're right on the beach there. And as we were walking around, we started walking about a block away is this really fancy hotel. And so we got back to our $188 a night room, and I pull up my phone. I'm like, I'm just curious how much the rooms are there. So I looked it up, and it starts at about $1,500 a night for the garden view / parking lot view room. And if you want the nicer rooms, it's about $7,000 a night.
Oof.
And so the people from that area, and it's obviously a beautiful hotel, great grounds, the closest beach to that area is the same beach that we were using. So there was one day when we were sitting there on the beach, and I'm just kind of looking around, and I'm like, all right, so we paid $188 a night. Some of the people at this beach are paying, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a night. It's the same beach. It's the same experience when you're actually out there. And so it actually kind of made me feel pretty good about myself. I'm like, not bad for only $188 a night, So I don't know. I've always been one where I would feel very uncomfortable if I was in a position where I was making that kind of money. And if suddenly my videos on YouTube started becoming extremely popular, it would probably make me reluctant to post things, because I don't like that. I don't really like a lot of eyes on me. I don't like a lot of attention. I think it would actually be a very negative force. So in some ways, what is viewed as success to some, I think, would be very detrimental to other people, certainly to myself and probably to you as well, because it would just interfere with the process of creating things that are more genuine to ourselves, as opposed to what's going to be popular for the masses, and making something that you enjoy into work, as opposed to something that you do actually enjoy doing.
Yeah, that makes me think of, we had mentioned about it before and talked a little bit about it before, but Craig Mod and his membership program that he has, and the idea that he's more than likely going to be capping membership off at most probably 3,000 members, if that. Just because anything over that, and even anything really over, like, say 1,500 people, where they are actively paying you for something, you start to feel that pressure. You start to feel like, okay, there's a lot of eyes on me right now. They're actively paying me $100 a year to create the work that I create, but I feel like I should be doing more for them because of this, like, in return. And so, I definitely agree that if I had those millions of views, millions of subscribers, whatever, it would change a lot. Like there'd be a lot more pressure on me to even bother putting anything out.
Yeah.
So it's weird. Not something exactly that I want, but money would be nice.
In moderation.
Yeah. Give me like that $3 million over like a 4-5 year span, and I'll be okay.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.